Hey, hello everyone. Welcome back to Medical Terminology. We are on week 11. So we are almost done with the semester. We got about a month left. So make sure to buckle in. Okay, make sure you're doing everything so you can finish this semester strong. So we only have about 5 weeks left. So looking at announcements, so assignments this week, you have a quiz and then you have a forum that you'll need to do. The forum is looking at some respiratory stuff and pollution. I've been getting a lot of questions about the final, so just kind of to quickly touch over on that. There'll be two parts to the final, so you'll have a small paper. It'll be about a page long, kind of a reflection about the semester, and then there'll be some stuff just kind of looking at corrections that we made on discussion boards throughout the semester, and kind of talking about that. The second part of the final will be there's an exam, just going over the stuff that's been in your quizzes, just basic medical terminology stuff, breaking down words, being able to understand what they mean. So I've been getting a few emails about that, and so I thought I'd just cover that. So don't be too worried about it. It is asynchronous online, which means that it'll be open during the whole week of finals, and you'll have, I believe you get an hour to do it. So should be plenty of time. Okay. So looking at the respiratory system, so there's kind of three main parts of the respiratory system. So you have the pharynx, you have the trachea, and you have the lungs. So the first part is the pharynx. So looking at the anatomy, you have the nasopharynx, you have the oropharynx, and you have the larynx, also known as the laryngeal pharynx. And so this is kind of the area from the beginning of the orifice, so either the nostril or the mouth, all the way down to either the trachea or the esophagus. And so a nasopharynx is kind of meant to be the primary place for you to breathe. Some people have like septum deviations or something that causes it, so it's hard to breathe through the nose. But for the most part, you should breathe through your nose because the nose does a lot of different things. And so you have terminates and all these membranes in there, but what they do is they filter the air, so they get rid of all the dust, any particulate out of the air. And then second, it warms the air, so so it's not as uncomfortable for your body. And the third part is that it actually humidifies the air so you don't dry out your lungs. So now that you guys know, breathe through your nose, it's healthier for you. The oropharynx also can be used for breathing. Often we use this when we need to increase airflow. So if any of you have ever done anything like with athletics or anything, when you're working pretty hard, you need that increase in oxygen. So your body's moving a lot more volume of air. And so you start breathing through your mouth as well as your nose to help with that. So in the last part, you got the nasopharynx, the la sorry, the laryngopharynx. And so what that is where the nasopharynx and the oropharynx come together. You get that larynx area from the back of your throat to the esophagus. And so the larynx is just a connection point right above where the trachea starts. You actually have your vocal folds, which is where your voice comes from. And so with the larynx, um, that's also where you kind of have that separation between the digestive system and the respiratory system. You have what's called the epiglottis that actually prevents food and other stuff from going into the respiratory system so you don't choke. Okay. Your trachea. So your trachea, what it is it's just a spot where everything branches off from the pharynx. So as I was saying earlier, you have the esophagus, you have the trachea. So the trachea is it's cartilage is what it is. And so those of you that take the advanced anatomy lab, you'll find that there's these discs of cartilage that make up the trachea. And so the job of the trachea is just to help transport air uh, from the pharynx to the lungs. So once you get to the lungs, everything goes to the trachea, it bifurcates, and you get the bronchi. So the bronchi are just these smaller tubes, you can see from this diagram. And so the bronchi continues to split until you get the bronchioles. And so the bronchioles are just smaller pathways, and they lead to the alveoli. And so the alveoli is where you get that diffusion that happens that oxygen exchange between the blood and the from the lung. And so if you look at the diagram in the textbook, you'll see that the alveoli that kind of look like bubbles, they have very thin tissue. And so that kind of like going back to the cardiac system, if you think about capillary beds, they have very thin tissue allowing for diffusion and a transport of materials, either waste or nutrients, in and out of cells or in and out of tissues. The alveoli kind of follow the same principle where it's thin tissue that allows for that diffusion back and forth. So super important. Some people that they get either acquired disease or genetic disease, and you'll see problems with the alveoli where that diffusion isn't happening properly. Either things are blocked or something's not functioning properly. Okay, so function of the lungs, or sorry, the respiratory system. So the biggest thing is oxygenation, keeping you breathing, keeping you going, keeping you healthy, keeping that O2 stat up. And the second thing that we use it for, it's not as important, but we still use it, is communication. Going back to those vocal folds, communication is pretty important for what we do. And so the respiratory system, because it's the air going over the vocal folds, that's how we make noise, that's how we communicate. And so it's pretty important in there for social interaction and that stuff. And so with the respiratory system, it's very connected to the cardiovascular system. Often when we study the two together, we refer to it as the cardiopulmonary system because these two systems work very closely together. And if you have a failure in one, you're going to see a failure in the other. And so those of you going into medicine, oftentimes what you'll do is you'll count, get your pulse, but you also get your respiratory rate together. And so having those two together really allows you to get a better picture of what's going on. If you have a super high pulse, but a super low respiratory rate, sometimes what that means is that they're not getting enough oxygen and the heart's trying to compensate, but it's just not working. And so give them a supplemental oxygen or something like that. And so studying them together is super important just because they work so much together. The last thing we're going to go over is just respiration, how it works, kind of the how, the why. And so with respiration, you have what's called negative pressure. So what it is you actually have tissues inside the thoracic cavity. And so there you have one layer that's here with the lung. It's attached to the lung and the other to the thoracic cavity. And then in between, there's a little bit of fluid. And so this is called the pleura, which you'll read about in your textbook. And so the pleural space is filled with this fluid. And so when the chest expands to breathe, it pulls like this and it creates a vacuum basically. And so that sucks the lung back up to the wall. And so the lung will expand with the chest cavity. And so when this happens, you get negative pressure inside the lung. And so air rushes in. So with all this, inhalation is an active process. And then you have kind of some natural almost elasticity to the thoracic cavity. And so with exhalation, everything just kind of relaxes and goes back to where it was before. And so you have a lot of different muscles that are involved in this. Depending on what you're doing, you have diaphragmatic breathing, you have intercostal breathing, depending. And so if you're, sleeping or breathing lightly, then you won't be using a lot of muscles. But if you are, running or doing something very active, you'll find that you have a lot more muscles involved trying to increase that, what we call tidal volume, that increase that volume of air that your body's moving in and out to increase oxygenation. So, yeah. So, that's all I have for this week. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You have my email, and then also set up Zoom hours with me. Okay. Thank you and have a great week.